Throuple to Throuple fans, listen up because today's the day we get to chat with Rehaman. I am so excited to have him here, and we're going to get into everything couple to throuple, his experience, and what went down after the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Absolutely, Leah. Thank you so much for having me.
So let's first start off with, if you're not following Rehaman, which, hello, why is the following count so low? I need you to follow. And his username on Instagram is Detroit Millennial. Very easy. Go follow him. We'll start there.
Yeah, it's plastered all over my shirts on the show as well too. So if you need a little bit of a refresher.
I'm going to rewatch just to notice that because I never noticed.
Yeah, I had like tank tops and stuff that I was just like, oh, I'm gonna just put this little thing on my shirt and wear it around, and yeah, it became a thing, I guess.
I love someone who self-promotes. That's
Yeah,
beautiful. I
why
can't
not?
wait to
Why
watch.
not?
Why not? So I want to start the same way how I start all of my interviews with people from television. So can you tell us where you're from and what you do? Because they didn't put too much of an emphasis on that in the show. I'm assuming Detroit, right?
Correct. Yes, I was born and raised in the Metro Detroit area, and lived there for basically 30 years of my life, until the last year and a half when Ashmal and I decided to relocate to Chicago. And as far as work goes, I work in the corporate world, specifically in marketing and communications. I've been doing that coming up on 10 years now, which is absolutely blows my mind that I'm 10 years into a career. But yeah, that's where I'm at so far.
That's a really good accomplishment. And is this 10 years with the same company?
No, 10 years with a few different companies, but like
Still,
like just your typical like Fortune 500 companies. Nothing too exciting, I guess.
totally. But still, 10 years is a big commitment to dedicate your life. I'm proud of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I think that's partially why I was like, you know what? Things are becoming a little monotonous. I need to kind of throw a wrench in my life right now, and reality TV, what better way to do that?
Okay, I love that. That's a good transition. So, how were you cast for the show? How did you get there?
Yeah, so this is actually a really interesting question because later on, Ashmal and I kind of did ask around. And when it came to Ashmal and I, we actually applied to be on the show. I actually was scrolling Facebook one day and got a Facebook ad that was like, are you in a relationship and are you open minded and maybe looking to experiment or grow your relationship? So I replied to that ad through Facebook, did a phone interview just by myself. And then after that, Ashmal and I both did a casting tape together, where we were just, ask questions together about our relationship, where we want to take it, and then the rest was history.
Okay, so this is interesting. So you specifically sought out this experience at first. What were you
Yes.
hoping to get from the experience for yourself first?
Yeah, so I think Ashma and I had already been kind of experimenting with our relationship before and, opening it up and seeing how that works. And so far, everything was working really well. And when I saw the ad and it said open minded couples looking to, potentially open up their relationship, I thought, listen, this is possibly a next step for our relationship to see, like, can we go beyond just, hookups or threesomes and really take it to the next level? So I thought we were in a pretty good spot to where we could kind of test that out and see what happens.
And it's a good way to definitely test your relationship and see how strong it is. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I can't think of a better test, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that I don't know if people really realize is that when they were going through the casting process, they specifically said, we are looking for couples who have very limited experience in this. Couples that maybe have experience with ethical non-monogamy, but never really polyamory, because they said the point of it is we want to bring on couples who are a little bit more novice to it so that we can teach you how to do it in a healthy environment, in a closed environment. So for me, that's what drew me to the experience was, listen, we don't know how this is going to go, but we're going to be under, the guise of a therapist and, a host who has experience with it. So what better way to do it than kind of in that confined space?
Thank you for adding, excuse me, thank you for adding that information because I, first of all, had no idea. And that kind of makes sense too, with sort of what Jonathan was saying from the singles perspective, where it was just like, it was kind of said openly that he hadn't dove into this in his personal life. So
Right.
hearing your story, it makes sense that people weren't that experienced with polyamory. And this was to, like you said, open their eyes and then teach them how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And anytime you're doing something new, especially with your relationship, like some might do really well and some might exceed really well, and then others, there might be some roadblocks and there might be some hurdles that you have to go through. So that's just what I want to make sure I clarify, that we didn't have experience with it, and we went into it and it was very real. Our reactions were very real. And that's just real life. When you haven't experienced something, sometimes it's not going to be, sunshine and roses right off the bat.
I really enjoyed that aspect of this show because you saw different ways things played out in different
Yeah.
couples, which I was very relatable. So once you get there and you find out that it's not only being open-minded, but also kind of just potentially bringing a permanent third in, what were you hoping that a third person would add to your and Ashmal's relationship?
I think maybe just a little like balance between the two of us. Ashmal's a very super outgoing, super friendly, loves to be the life of the party. I I do feel like in certain ways I am a little bit outgoing, but obviously, like as an Aquarius, it does take a little bit more time for us to open up.
Yes.
So I am a little bit more reserved and laid back. And I think bringing in a third person, we were looking for maybe somebody who can kind of balance those two dynamics out. And then also just because we've already been opening up a relationship physically, we thought, you know what, why don't we try and open up our relationship on an emotional side and see if that works and see if we're okay seeing the other person in the relationship. So for me, that being Ashmal, kind of fall for somebody and grow with somebody else emotionally. And for us to be okay with that. Maybe we're not okay with that, but let's just try it out and see what happens from there.
That perspective really makes sense because you never really know until you're in it if someone could potentially end up falling more, if there's like a
Yeah.
physical connection between one person, emotional for the other. And your relationship specifically was so interesting to see that because there was this element to the conversation of at first Jonathan felt like he was connecting, emotionally with Ashley and physically
Mhm.
with you. And I really appreciated you and your perspective saying that it was just a little bit disheartening and it almost feels like a little bit of a rejection to hear that when you think that you've been being pretty open. And I really resonated with you adding that in because relatable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the problem was that, Ashmal and I are two totally different people. And sometimes it was hard for us to be moving along at the same exact pace. Like Ashmal is
Mhm.
able to just jump in a conversation with Jonathan and talk about whatever. And for me, it took a little bit longer for that to happen. And then when it's taking longer, then you start to see me react a certain way. And then it affects the relationship with all three of us. So it was definitely a tricky situation, definitely was not easy, but something that I think we worked through, and I think that really was reflected to the viewers as far as the challenges that we did face.
In hindsight, would you have done this experience if you knew that ultimately, because like going forward, it would end with you and Ash not being together?
Yeah, it's a tricky question. I feel like overall, though, just encompassing everything that I've learned from the show, I would say yes, because I would say I learned so much more about myself. I feel like the minute I turned 30, I've already started to really change as a person and become so much more unapologetically myself, so much more confident in myself. And I think doing this show in some strange ways also helped me do that so much more than I thought. I feel so much more independent now. I feel like I really know who I am and what I want out of life and what I want out of a partner. And I don't know if I would have learned all of those things hadn't I done the show. So at the end of the day, we did it. Some good things came from it, some bad things came from it, but no regrets here.
I love to hear that. And I'm going to touch later on a couple of things you said because I was curious about a few of them. But
Yeah.
continuing really quickly and staying on that subject, if you, and I guess we could just predict, but if you hadn't come on the show, do you think that you and Ashmal would still be together? Or like, do you think that this was ultimately something that needed to happen so you could, like you said, learn more about yourself, learn more about what you want from a partner?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, to be honest with you, it's hard to tell like whether or not we would still be together. I mean, we had been in a relationship for so long, but if you remember on the show, we talked about we had met only a couple months prior to COVID, and then COVID hit, so we were really just quarantining. We weren't really going out and experience life, as a whole,
True.
how we normally would outside of COVID. I feel like right around the time we started applying for the show and going through that process, that's when things started to open up. So we started going out more and learning more about how we act, when we're out together and all that. So it's possibility that, the more we did stuff going out, that we would have come to the realization that like we're just not fully compatible like that. At the same time, though, I think the show definitely did accelerate some of those
Yes.
conversations. I feel like if we had not done the show, we were already talking prior to going on the show about like, hey, maybe we entertain the idea of doing like couples therapy and all of that. And then I think the show kind of just snuck up on us and we're like, well, we don't have time to do couples therapy because we're going on the show now.
Right.
So unfortunately that wasn't an option, but that is something that we did talk about quite a bit. So who knows, if we did do the show and we eventually did decide to go to couples therapy, things could have ended up differently.
Right. Okay. I really appreciate that perspective.
Yeah.
Going into really quickly how you were portrayed on the show, do you think that you were accurately portrayed on the show? Is there things that you wish that they showed to us as viewers who don't know you our whole life?
Yeah, I mean, I wish they would have showed me smile a little bit more, but because I really am more of like a smiley, like happy person, and I feel like it kind of showed me as just being a little bit of a downer, being somebody who like needs a lot of attention, and that is something that I did realize, like maybe I do require a lot of attention from a partner, and that's okay. Like that's just
Yes.
maybe my love language, maybe that's my romantic style of wanting to kind of have my partner by my side, especially when we're in settings that are very new and we're around so many big personalities. They're also very new people that we've never met. I think that kind of came out a bit, but yeah, I wish they would have shown more of the conversations that I did have with Ashmal and Jonathan, because I feel like a lot of the times it was more of me just reacting, and people are kind of like, why is he reacting this way? Like, what led up to this? So I wish they would have showed a little bit more of like what led up to some of the ways that I reacted on the show. But all in all, like I did it. I knew that it was filming 24/7, and I knew that it could be edited in any type of way. So I don't really have any regrets when it comes to that.
To play devil's advocate for you for a second,
Yeah.
like now that I've interviewed Jonathan, I know a little bit more about Ashmal's personality just because I know that he's very sarcastic. And I know because I've talked to Ashmal that we both share like ADHD together. And I know that when someone is like over communicative of their feelings, sometimes one, it feels like there's no space for you to chime in, but also it feels a little bit comparative to be like, I'm not sure that I can articulate things the way that you do. And because of that, I'm feeling a little bit like I'm withdrawing in myself. And I feel like that was probably going on a little bit too. And it's like the Aquarius in us, we words of validation are my love language as well. But
Yeah.
sarcastic comments, sometimes we sit there with them and we're like, did they mean that? Like, do you think they meant that?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I can see how you would get to those spaces. You know what I mean? Whether you feel like there's no space or the comments maybe rub you the wrong way in the setting that you're not used to. So I get where you're coming from. I get where everyone's coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things too is like Ashmal and I, when we were in a relationship, because of our background, maybe because of our looks, we always will get compared. And I've come to the realization that I will never live up to Ashmal in any way, shape, or form. But what I've really had to learn, especially after the show, is I don't need to live up to him. Like I
Absolutely.
need to take that out of my head and stop constantly comparing myself. And you know what? Part of it maybe has come from me being single now. And when we go hang out with our group of friends, it's not, oh, we invited Ashmal and Rahman's tagging along. Now it's, oh, we've specifically invited Rahman because we
Yes.
want him there for
Yes.
his personality and what he adds to the environment and our friend group. And that's definitely helped me become a lot more confident in myself and who I am and what I bring to the table, whether it be friends, my family, romantically, all that type of stuff.
Absolutely. Because when you're with a very outgoing partner, sometimes it feels like, like, wait, I'm interesting too. Like, wait, I'm cool
Yeah.
too. Like, do you want me there? So it is a very validating factor to just kind of ease away from that codependency and just have people like truly be like, no, like, we want you there. Like, it's always been that we want you there. But, now we just want, specifically the text goes just to you versus to a
Yeah.
group chat. You know what I mean? It's very validating.
Absolutely, yeah. And there have been so many times where I had to actually look back and like when we have gone to parties, like we'll be in a big group circle talking and like I'll be engaging and stuff like that. But then you will see people break off and sometimes I'll see somebody like sitting by themselves and I'm like, you know what? Maybe they're not comfortable being in a big group setting. I'm going to go
Yes.
talk to them one on one and I'll go talk to them for like 20, 30 minutes at this party. And then later on, these will be parties that like maybe were Ashmal's friends. Later on,
Right.
Ashmal will get a text from that person and be like, oh my god, I just have to say I loved Rehaman. The fact that he like took the time out to like sit by me one on
Mhm.
one, was asking about my life, my career, all this.
Absolutely.
It really did make a difference to me. And I realized I just show up maybe a little bit differently than Ashmal
Absolutely.
does, but it is needed in those spaces. You know, you don't want to have the same type of person, you know, everywhere. So
Totally. Like, while you may not be the center of attention, you are just as present, both physically and mentally, and making time
yes,
to really connect with people. And that individual connection is important to you. So I think that it's
yes.
really beautiful that you've been able to give yourself grace and then look back at yourself and be like, I've always brought stuff to the table, but it's been a little bit harder to see at times.
Exactly, exactly, yes. And especially on this show where it's like you kind of do have to be loud and you do have to have
Of
a super big
course.
personality. It was hard for me to show up that way. So I think that's why it kind of showed me always reserved, wanting to sit
Right.
by myself and all of that,
Yes.
which is fine, you know.
Of course, yes, it's television, but it's good to add context, and I love doing these interviews because I recognize as a viewer that I'm seeing, even if it doesn't even matter the screen time, I'm seeing maybe a month of your life. And
Right.
there's 30 years that I haven't seen that make you who you are, that lead to the reaction styles you have, that is, your fun and best sides that might not be shown on television. So I realize that and like to show that in my interviews.
Absolutely. No, thank you. I appreciate
Of
it. Especially
course.
I appreciate it because I think I need it really,
Yeah.
really bad right now. So
No, you know what? I think that everything that you've taken from the show, which we'll get to later on, is so real. None of us would love to have our most vulnerable moments recorded, even by our partner. So to
yeah,
have them on television where like, okay, everybody, what do you think of this? It's very like a mirror back at yourself. It's an opportunity to say, well, I didn't like that part, or oh yes, I still stand by reacting that way. Like, do you see where I was coming from? It's a mirror.
absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you have, or did you guys have any other connections that we weren't shown other than Jonathan and Frank on the show?
So we did actually have a lot of conversations with some of the singles that actually just completely did not air. And I think it's because the main focus was really Jonathan. You saw that storyline start from basically episode 1 all the way into episode 10. But no, some of the singles
Hmm.
that we had talked to that we didn't really get to see, Sadie was one of them that I think at every single mixer, we're talking to her. Really cool person, really cool background. She brought a lot to the table. Jess was also another one that I think earlier on we were definitely entertaining, bringing her into a relationship, but ultimately she joined another couple. And then one that I want to talk about is Lena. Actually, Lena, we had quite a bit of conversations with. And if you remember the episode where we had a white party where you were able to put beads around somebody, I
Yep.
don't even think they showed the person that we put beads on, but we actually chose Lena. And we got to have kind of like a private little convo slash date with her. Got to learn a little bit more about her life in LA. We asked her, like, if we came out to LA, what would a date night be like with the three of us? Just really cool, laid back conversation. And she's closer to my age. She's in her 30s. So the maturity was there. The life experience was there. She was really comfortable with who she was as a person. So yeah, it's hard because there are so many people that we could have got to know and got to build relationships with, and ultimately you have to choose one person. And then once you get emotionally invested in that one person, it's hard to go on to another person.
I'm sorry that I started laughing in the middle of this. I was just thinking back to the party you mentioned. Was this the
Yeah.
party where Jonathan was attempting to talk to you and Ashmal, and somebody came up and interrupted, and it was like very awkward?
No, that was I think a few more mixers after he had already left our relationship. Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yep,
just because I'm trying to place Lena. I honestly will have to look Lena up, and
yeah,
everybody listening, look up Lena. Like I don't
yeah.
remember Lena as like an active character, so I'm excited to like follow her after and see who she was.
Yeah, it's crazy because I don't think she had very much screen time, but she has become almost like a fan favorite. People are like, "We want more Lena. We want to know more about Lena. She's beautiful. She's, gives off like that queer vibe, which I think a lot of the people were looking for on the show." So, yeah, she's an amazing person. Hung out with her in LA for the watch party. Super, super cool outside of the show. So, yeah, again, wish we would have had more time.
Okay, yay. I can't wait to hear that. And I'm so upset that I'm behind on the favorite.
Oh, no, that's okay.
I have to catch up. So, initially, what attracted you most to Jonathan? Like when you guys decided to pursue that connection the most, what was it?
I mean, I think obviously like very attractive person. Like I said, definitely somebody that I would be used to dating outside of the house. But also once we got to talk to him, kind of going back to that dynamic of like Ashmal's personality and my personality, and then seeing Jonathan's personality, it was a little bit more in the middle, but I will say it maybe is a little bit more closer to my personality over
Hmm.
Ashmal's. And the thing is, I don't know if we could have brought in another Ashmal into our relationship. I don't know if I could handle that, but also I don't know if Ashmal would want to handle that. So I think we thought, let's bring in somebody who is a little bit more kind of chilled, laid back.
Yes,
We think that that would just fit with our dynamic a little bit easier. Um, and then also, to be honest with you, it was just all those things. And then it just being like a gut feeling of we have to choose him first, because if we don't choose him first and we choose somebody else, I feel like we'll continuously be saying, what if we had chosen Jonathan?
absolutely.
So let's give him the first go around and see if we can really build a connection, and then go from there. If it doesn't work, if our first impressions were totally off, we can decide to eventually swap him out and maybe choose somebody else. But ultimately, things did go pretty good at first.
When Jonathan stepped down, and we find out that ultimately he was fearful of rejection, fearful that you guys weren't going to reselect him. But obviously, you're not knowing that until days later or hours later. I'm not really sure the time frame. But
Right.
while being coupled with Frank, did you feel like it was more of like a second option, or was there a lot with Frank that we like weren't shown connection wise and talking at the mixers? And also, did like are you guys good now, or like how did you handle ending that relationship? Like how did you feel about that?
The ending the relationship with Frank.
Yes, like the
Okay, yeah,
brief
yeah.
relationship.
Yeah, so no, I think Frank was an initial choice at first. I think the reason why we didn't go with Frank at first specifically was because I remember asking, like, oh, what do you do and where are you from? And he said he was an actor from LA. And immediately in my head,
I
I'm like,
remember that.
we're on a
Yes.
reality TV show. He's from LA. He said he's an actor.
Yes.
Let's hold off right now and let's maybe explore something else. But as we were doing the mixers more and more, we were getting to have more time with Frank, more conversations with him. I think you also saw that compatibility challenge where they had to step
Oh
forward.
yes,
Him and Frank, I think him and Jonathan tied, I
they
believe.
did. Yes.
So yeah, from the compatibility standpoint, again, very strong. And then once we brought him into the house, we did have so many conversations with Frank just about our lives, about his life, what he wants out of life. And again, Frank is a little bit older. He's closer to my age in his 30s. So that maturity was just really attractive to me.
Yes.
Unfortunately, you still have those feelings for Jonathan in the back of your mind. So I wasn't
Yes.
fully able to dive in.
Hmm.
But what I was seeing from Frank was very, very impressed. And unfortunately, again, just the nature of the show, we weren't able to have too many conversations when that last unfinished business happened, where Jonathan eventually came back into our relationship. That's definitely my biggest regret. It was just the nature of the show, though. We were not able to
Absolutely.
pull him aside and give him as much of a heads up because we didn't even know what was happening.
Right.
But yeah, no, today, again, very cool with Frank.
Good.
DM him on Instagram all the time. We saw him in LA for the watch party. Super nice, super sweet person. Frank, if there's one person that needs their dating show after this, I think it is definitely Frank. So I'll throw that out there.
Okay, love that. I'm gonna chat with Frank. I think like next week or something. But I
Good.
loved him. I loved the vibe that he brought to your relationship too, because he was so like not stoic, but just like very quiet and taking things in. However, the looks on his face like said everything. Like just like a quick glance at like one person, it's like, I know what you're thinking, Frank, and this is awkward. You know what I mean? Like I
Yes.
agree. I can validate
Yes.
that. Um,
Yeah.
but I'm glad to hear like more about the relationship, because it's sad when you like fall for one throuple and then all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, but I still loved the initial one.
Right.
When Maximo and Ash got there, was the tension because of the mutual interest in Jonathan, or was there like comments made off camera that we missed? Like clue me in.
No, I'll be completely honest with you. The tension was 100% to do with Jonathan and them kind of not giving us a real like answer essentially, or letting us know and giving us a heads up. I think they showed it actually before that in a few episodes prior when Maximo and Ash had joined. Ashmal and I were like, oh my God, this is great, another queer
Yes.
couple. And then we actually did have that conversation, the four of us, over at the area where we would eat breakfast. And like, I was like, I love this. Like these seem like two individuals that after the show is done outside of this house, I would love to be friends with. And unfortunately, it took a turn for the worse because they started pursuing somebody that Ashmal and I still had feelings in. And, apparently he still had feelings for us as well, too. So I wasn't off when I, was making that
Completely.
judgment call. But yeah, no, once Jonathan came back into our relationship, I mean, there was still probably that lingering tension, but I definitely didn't feel as much bad blood anymore because essentially we kind of got what we needed or what we wanted.
Yes.
So yeah, it was simply from that. There was nothing else underlying or that you guys didn't see.
Got it. And are you friends now? Like are you guys close now, or what's the situation?
So we didn't speak for the longest, but actually at the watch party in LA, Maximo and I did pull each other aside. I can't remember who pulled who aside first, but we had a conversation for like 10, 15 minutes and we just looked at each other and we're like, listen, this is all water under the bridge. Like,
Love it.
I have no bad blood with you. You have no bad blood with me. And we both also looked at each other and we're like, also, we kind of made the TV show. Like, we did that. Like, we did that on TV. And we're like, let's just be proud of that and move forward. So now we like
Absolutely.
follow each other on social media. If I'm ever in New York, I would feel comfortable hitting up Maximo and Ash. And I hope that they would feel the same way if they ever come to Chicago. Would love to hang out outside of, that resort and outside of
Absolutely.
Panama and just, see how we are in everyday life.
I love to hear that. I love to hear that so much because it's so real. Like you get wrapped up in the show, emotions are on. You don't even have your phones or your family or people who would like center you. And it's like, like, no, this is like,
Yeah.
I'm pursuing this relationship. I can see how the resentment or just basic annoyance would come into play,
Yeah. Yeah, that's totally where it was from. And I think that's why at that watch party, I was so glad that they showed up and so glad that I
Yes.
had the opportunity.
To
And
clear
one thing
the
I
air.
did say to Maximo in particular was that, you know, in so many ways, I look up to you because you are so unapologetically yourself and you are so confident in who you are. And I'm like, that's who I'm trying to become. And so, like, you are kind of like somebody that I would look up to in that regard, that, like, I want to become more unapologetically myself. And you're somebody that's doing that. And there are probably so many people out there that are watching this saying, wow, like, I can learn from that individual because they just give no fucks about anything. They're confident in who they are and they live their lives with their truth. So I wanted him to know that, and he appreciated it for sure.
Absolutely. That's really beautiful. That's a beautiful reflection. It's always good to, tell people also like what we may have missed to begin with. You know what I mean? Like recircling
Yeah,
back when you repatch things, it's like, actually these things I really appreciate about you. And I could even learn a couple of things if I'm open, and now I'm open to it.
absolutely.
So I think that shows a lot of maturity on your part.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Um, so we talked a little bit about what this experience taught you about yourself. Like we touched on it, but I want to hear
Mhm.
more specifically. Like what did you learn about yourself, and what did you learn that you want out of a future partner?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I learned was obviously being better at communicating, but more specifically, I think you saw it sometime on the show, and this used to happen before the show about, like, giving the silent treatment and not necessarily opening up and just telling how you feel in the moment. And I will say, like, I think after leaving the show immediately, even in the throuple with Jonathan, and then also just with my relationship with Ashmal, I kind of cut the whole silent treatment out. I'm like, listen, that's not benefiting anybody. It's not solving whatever issue that we're having. And I'm a very like solution oriented type of person. So I'm like, by giving the silent treatment, nobody's learning anything and there's no way for us to move forward. So as long as I just give my feelings and give my emotions kind of in the moment, that's so much better, because that means that we're going to be able to come to a resolution so much quicker. And essentially that's what we want. Like, I don't want there to ever be like lingering bad blood between anybody or between my partners. So that's probably one of the main things that I learned. And as far as a romantic partner goes, I think it's just, I don't know, I try not to compare myself to some of the other couples and stuff and like that in the house, but one that I keep going back to is Dylan and Lauren. Two very independent, confident individuals. They're able to do things on their own, but ultimately they just love each other's company so much that like they would eat breakfast together, they'd go get coffee together, they'd work out together. And I'm like, I do like somebody who likes to be by my side and for us to do things together. Of course, we can have our own hobbies, and I like to work out on my own specifically. So Ashmal knew that, and we would never work out together. But ultimately, like, especially when we're in group settings, I do like to have my partner near me. And I think that's kind of the difference between like Jonathan and Ashmal. When we would go out, Jonathan would kind of stay by my side, and I did appreciate that. And I think Ashmal in some ways appreciated that too when we were in the throuple, because Ashmal's like, now I can go out and do my thing and go on the dance floor and all that. And Rehaman's okay because he has his other boyfriend here who's, by his side and getting him what he needs.
That makes sense. Like, he can go out, be a social butterfly, while you can, stay close, mingle with a couple of people, and not also simultaneously be dragged around with Ashmal and like be like, like awkwardly saying back or like saying a couple of words, which always feels awkward.
Right. Absolutely.
So I'm glad that we're almost to the point where we're talking a little bit about after the show. So you described a little bit about what your relationship in the throuple was like. Jonathan would stay by your side. Ashmal's a social butterfly. Like, just fill us in, like fill in the holes. Like, you got the three of you dated. How was it? And where did it go wrong?
So after leaving the show, Jonathan actually would come out to Chicago because of the nature of his work. He was able to fly frequently. So he was coming out to Chicago almost every single weekend for like 2 or 3 months straight. I think maybe there was a couple weekends where he didn't come, but otherwise we were hanging out all the time. Things were going really good, but then, obviously like Ashmal and I's personalities sometimes just clash a little bit. And unfortunately, sometimes he would get caught in the crosshairs, which is okay in some ways, because ultimately, like the show, when we left the show, we were thinking everything had to be 100% equal. The relationship between the three of us all had to be 100% equal. And we came to the realization that that is just not the case. That's not realistic. Right. Like, obviously, Ashmal and I have this relationship that has tons of experience. We brought in this new person who we're also feeling that like new relationship energy with. But then Ashmal and I were kind of like, well, what about the energy between us two? And we've been dating for almost 4 years now, and it doesn't feel as new and exciting and having to deal with all of that. And then ultimately, too, I think one of the biggest things that led our relationship into the wrong path is that people's emotions move at a different pace. My emotions were moving at a little bit of a quicker pace for Jonathan than Ashmal's were. And it was trying to manage that and manage Ashmal's feelings about that and manage my feelings about that. And then Jonathan having to manage both of our feelings about that. So I think that's ultimately where things kind of went wrong, was just we were all at different levels emotionally and trying to kind of reconcile that between the three of us.
So I think it was at least what they said on the screen. I think the text said that it was Ashmal who like first left. He first left the throuple. So was his reasoning then because like he felt like your relationship was moving faster with Jonathan, he wasn't there, and just sort of like the odd man out, so to speak?
Yeah, I think ultimately he felt like I was putting in a little bit more effort with Jonathan, but I think coming from my point of view, Jonathan was only coming in on the weekends. So when Jonathan would come in on the weekends, I was trying to give him as much energy as possible. Totally. But what I tried to talk to Ashmal about is I'm like, I'm giving you my energy all the other days of the week. Totally. Like, we go to work, you come home from work, we cook dinner together, we sit on the couch together, we watch TV together, and we were still going on dates separately from Jonathan. Like, when he wasn't there during the week, we'd hang out with friends. So it was me trying to balance like those expectations that Ashmal had, but then also know we have this third boyfriend who at this point, we were like, we're all on a level, like equal playing field, essentially. Like there is no Ashmal and I, and then there's this third person. It's
Yes.
all three of us are dating. So
Yes.
I always wanted to make sure that Jonathan felt 100% included. His
Yes.
voice, his feelings all mattered. And yeah, it was hard to do it with two people.
Absolutely.
Two people who I don't know how much they were connecting emotionally, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if it was as quick as Jonathan and I were. And the thing is, I don't know if they wanted it to be at the
Yes.
level that Jonathan and I were.
Mm-hmm.
So it was hard for me to kind of deal with that. And it's like, what do you do at that point?
Absolutely. It's between like a rock and a hard place. Like, well, on one
Yeah,
hand, I know that this feels bad for you, but on the other hand, we got into this to take it seriously, give it 100%, and now my
yeah,
feelings have blossomed. I get that. Um,
yeah,
so ultimately, when Ashmal left the relationship and you can like proceeded to date Jonathan for a little bit,
yes.
how did he handle that? Like, was he initially not speaking to you, or were things okay and understood because um kind of like the situation, the context of how things happened?
Yeah, no. So when Ashmal ended the relationship, we were actually still in LA. And for the remainder of that LA trip, Jonathan and I were talking. Like Jonathan was 100% there for me, was by my side. We were still staying in the same Airbnb. And then when we left, that's kind of when I was like, oh my God, is this the last time I'm going to see this person? Now that the throuple is over, maybe he doesn't want to continue anything. But after we got back to Chicago, he got back to New York. Jonathan and I still kept in contact. And it wasn't very clear to me, and that's part of the reason I think why he and I didn't work out. But he
Right.
was like, I don't feel like it would be good to date you fully and call each other boyfriends right now because you're still getting over, Ashmal, you still live together, your lease is, there for another month and a half. But then on the flip side, he was like, but I still want to pursue something with you and I still want to come see you. So
Right.
for the next like month and a half, I want to say, he was still coming every single week.
Right.
But this time we would get like a hotel or an Airbnb or something like that so that we weren't necessarily staying in the apartment with Ashmal. And I would just go, for a day or two or whatever and go stay with Jonathan and still kind of build whatever connection that he and I had.
And when you and Ashmal were still living together, were you guys like in a relationship, but just like from his perspective, Jonathan wasn't included, or were you friends and just like who were like kind of stuck living with each other right now while during this odd patch of a relationship?
Yeah, it was more of us just being friends at that point.
Yes.
And I think also just kind of like consoling each other or
Yes.
being there for each other, knowing that we just went through this breakup. We had all this past history. But I will make it very clear like the minute Ashma and I broke up and ended that relationship and we landed back in Chicago, I was sleeping in the guest bedroom every single night until we moved out of that apartment. Like, and that's
Yes.
kind of what I tried to reiterate to Jonathan.
That
Like,
makes sense.
we are not being physical with each other. Like the relationship is over. Unfortunately, we live together and we work similar schedules. So we're going to cross paths no matter what. But I want you
Right.
to know that like my heart is more invested in moving into a relationship with you.
Mm-hmm.
But on the flip side, totally, completely understand his worries, his concerns. He doesn't even live in the same city. So it's one of those things where it's like wrong place, the wrong time. If we would have
Yes.
met at a different part in our life, who
Mhm.
knows, things could have ended differently between us.
I completely agree. I have that same sentiment because it's almost like, excuse me, like the paths just didn't align at the right time. However,
Yeah,
that doesn't mean that the intention and the feelings weren't there, So that's
right.
that's kind of my take. How did
Absolutely.
how did all of that, like the experience afterwards, how are you feeling now about poly relationships? Like, are you open to them still? And just like thruples specifically, like, would you do another thruple?
You know,
Mhm.
I think thruples are very hard. And I think before you just jump into it and say, okay, we're a thruple now, I think there does need to be a lot more communication. There does need to be a lot more experience and a lot more growing with the three of you before you can solidly say, hey, let's go do this as a thruple.
Yes.
But as far as polyamory goes, one thing that I did after
Mhm.
the show was do a lot more research on polyamory
Mhm.
and learn that there are different ways outside of just being a thruple to be polyamorous. Whether that means, you're dating multiple people, but it's all separate, stuff like that. So I think for me, I always like to keep an open mind, especially now having experienced my first polyamorous relationship. I definitely would still keep an open mind. Whether I pursue polyamory, whether I just pursue ethical non-monogamy in some other way,
Yes.
would still stay open to it. I don't know right off the bat if I would jump into another polyamorous relationship or if I want to start out more monogamous and then kind of
Right.
maybe grow my way into that.
Right. Like build that foundation, build that trust, then open the relationship. That makes sense.
Yes,
And this
absolutely.
shows so much growth. Like I cannot say that enough. Like this shows so much growth, and not saying that in a bad way. Like you had so much room to grow, but just to be already showing up as a great person, and then to look at yourself and say, well, I could be even better if I just like,
Yeah.
realize these things. That's amazing. I guess I'll end with
Yeah.
this. Would you do reality television again?
I think I would. I think overall I had such a fun time, even though it was so many roller coasters of emotions and so many ups and downs. I think ultimately the stuff that I learned about myself, like I don't know if I would have been able to reflect on that had I not done the show. And I'm always about learning and always about becoming a better person. And that's really what I've taken away from this. And that's why looking back and watching the show, like I have such a positive feeling about it, even regarding all the comments that people have, said about me or said about how I came across. Like I know who I am, and I also know and can reflect on like what I still need to work on. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters to me. And as far
Absolutely.
as people's opinions or comments about me, as long as my family and my close friends, and then also the people that I was in a relationship with, being Ashmal and Jonathan, as long as they know where I'm at in my life and where my head stands and how I feel, that's essentially all that matters. I feel like sometimes when you worry too much about what random people are thinking of you, you aren't able to show up as your full authentic self. And as
Absolutely.
I get older and become slightly more wiser than, when I used to be in my 20s, I feel like that's something that's so important to me, is just becoming a better version of myself every single day until the day I die, essentially. Like, I don't think there'll ever be a day in my life where I'm 100% perfect. And I'm okay with that.
That's beautiful too. Everything you say, like I said, it sounds like you've been to therapy. It sounds like you've done self-reflection. It sounds like you've had a
Yeah.
lot of growth, and all of that is phenomenal. Has your family, really quickly, I actually want to end with this. Has your family watched the show? Like, did they watch? Or friends?
So yeah, so friends definitely did watch, and then a couple of my sisters. Well, I only have two sisters, so to both my sisters watched the show. Yeah, everybody has been super supportive. Again,
Good.
even like friends, when we've watched it, I'm like, oh my god, like don't watch this episode, don't watch the second episode, and they're like, Rahman, shut up. Like we know who you are. We are hanging out with you. Obviously, we know your true self. And they're like, ultimately, you did make the show interesting, so that's all that
Absolutely.
matters. So
Absolutely.
yeah, getting validation, I think, and having a strong support system of people that are close to you and know who you really are was super important to me. And just hearing their positive feedback and no judgment at all was definitely a beautiful thing.
Well, I want to let you know as we wrap up that you've had a lot of positive comments that I've seen. I've seen tons of positive comments, especially when I threw out to Reddit, like I'm going to be talking with Rehaman and I'm going to be talking with Ashmal. Let me know questions. Everyone was ecstatic. And people were like, I want to see Rehaman on Traitors. Like, so that's what I was told to pass along to you. They're like, tell Rehaman the next Peacock show that we want to see him on is Traitors. So that's my
Okay.
delivered message. And
Okay,
and anybody listening, and like that's important.
as long as it's traders, because I've also seen a couple comments like on Twitter, I think, where they're like, oh, Ramon for House of Villains. And I'm like, I did you watch the ending? I'm like, I don't think I'm a villain, but whatever. Like,
No,
I don't know if I can compete with
Traitors.
some of those people. Yeah. Traders,
Yes.
yes. I can tell you how many Thanksgiving and Christmases with family and extended family where we played the game Mafia. That was definitely a regular thing growing up, which is very similar to the format of Traders. So yeah, throw me in, I'm ready. Also, but throw in a couple people from Couple to Throuple, and I think
Please.
the Couple to Throuple alliance would totally dominate.
Oh, please,
Yeah,
please, please. I need to see this.
we're just so different, and we're just like we come from so many different walks of life, which is part of the reason why I love doing the show and love meeting all of the other cast. But yeah, that would be fun.
I'm so excited thinking about the thought of it. Thank you so, so much for your time today. I will be
Absolutely.
ruminating and planning you would be like on Schrader season 3 or season 4 and manifesting on my side. Is there anything that
Yes.
you'd like to plug or say before we end?
No, just, I mean, thanks everybody for all the support. And like you said, you saw positive messages. I can't tell you how many DMs I've gotten where people are like, you know what, I just want to say thank you so much for just being so real. Like you came across as one of
Yes.
the most real people just showing your emotions and not trying to act like everything was perfect. And just hearing that is again validating that we're not perfect. We're humans. If I was a robot, maybe I would have acted differently, but I'm not a robot. And it's nice to see, because sometimes I do think that I come across as a little like robotic, or he doesn't have emotions. And this show clearly showed that this is the exact opposite. So definitely fortunate for that, but so thankful for everybody that's reached out.
You're a full range of emotions. You have a broad spectrum. You're multifaceted, multi-layered, multidimensional. And I'm so happy that you've gotten good comments. And I know that you'll get a ton of more positive messages after people hear this episode too. Thank you so much for your time. I can't wait to talk with you after Traitors season 3 and you're on it.
Yes, I will come back. I'll promise.
I know you will. I know.
Yeah.
Yay.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leah, again for having me.